Welcome to Heartfelt Revenge Stories. On the evening of my 35th birthday, I wasn't surrounded by family singing or watching candles flicker on a homemade cake. Instead, I sat alone in my small apartment, staring at a store-bought cupcake, while my phone screen glowed with images I wish I'd never seen. There, on Facebook, were my parents at the airport, arms wrapped around my younger sister, Melissa, their faces bright with excitement as they filmed her reaction to a surprise trip to Paris. My father had left a comment under the video that made my stomach twist. "She's the one who truly makes us proud." My mother had simply added a red heart emoji beneath his words. I didn't cry when I saw it. I didn't leave an angry comment or call to confront them. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I opened my banking app with steady hands and pressed withdraw. That single decision changed everything, whether they were ready for it or not. Let me take you back to that moment. I was sitting at my cramped kitchen table, the one that came with the apartment I rented just off the military base where I'd been stationed for years. The heater made this awful rattling sound whenever it kicked on, so I'd cracked the window open despite the cold. Outside, I could hear the usual soundtrack of weeknight traffic, distant sirens, the hum of a city that never quite settled down. 35 years old, and this was my celebration? No balloons tied to chairs, no phone calls from people who mattered, just me and a single cupcake from the grocery store down the street. The bakery clerk had written the number 35 in wobbly pink icing and smiled at me like it was supposed to mean something special. I'd woken up that morning with a small flutter of hope in my chest. Surely someone would remember. A text from my mom, maybe a quick call from my dad, even a lazy, happy birthday from Melissa. But as the hours ticked by, my phone stayed silent. Not a single message, not even the generic automated greeting from my dentist's office. By mid-afternoon, I'd convinced myself they'd call later. They were probably busy. They always had something going on, some reason why reaching out slipped their minds. I'd learned over the years not to expect too much. I was the dependable one, the one who didn't need constant attention or reassurance. I told myself that was fine. I was fine. Then my phone buzzed. Finally, I thought. But when I looked down, my heart sank. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from Facebook. Before I could even tap the screen, a video started playing automatically. There was Melissa, my younger sister, laughing as she pulled a suitcase through an airport terminal. My mother's voice rang out in the background, high-pitched and giddy with excitement. "She has no idea where we're taking her." The caption read, "Surprise trip to Paris. So proud of this girl," with a string of heart and airplane emojis. The comments were already pouring in. Friends, distant relatives, people from our old church, all of them gushing. "Oh my gosh, she deserves it. Best parents ever. Have the time of your life, sweetie." The praise went on, an endless scroll of validation and celebration for a trip I hadn't even known was happening. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end. Let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's not just my story. It's the story of so many people who've been made to feel invisible by the ones who should have seen them most clearly. Then I saw it. My father's comment, pinned near the top like it deserved to be framed and hung on a wall. "She's the one who truly makes us proud." 6 words. That's all it took. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have, reading it over and over until the letters started to blur. It wasn't shocking, not really. That sentiment had followed me my entire life. I'd heard variations of it whispered behind closed doors, implied in the way they spoke about Melissa's struggles versus my successes. But seeing it written out so plainly, posted publicly for everyone to see, that felt different. It felt like a bruise someone had finally decided to poke in public, and they didn't even care that I might see it. My mother had reacted to his comment with a single red heart. Just one click. No words, no clarification, no attempt to soften the blow. Just agreement. I set my phone down on the table and looked at the cupcakes sitting in front of me, vanilla with pink frosting, the candles still unlit. The number 35 stared back at me, crooked and childish. I hadn't even bothered to light it yet. What was the point? Who was I celebrating for? At first, I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long shift or a bad night's sleep. This was deeper, heavier, the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you realize you've been carrying something far too heavy for far too long, and you forgot what it felt like to put it down. Have you ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to love you most? Drop a comment and let me know. I've been in the U.S. military for over a decade now. I joined straight out of high school because I needed structure, discipline, and honestly, I needed to get out. I needed distance from a home that never quite felt like mine. The military taught me how to keep my emotions in check, how to show up on time no matter what, how to carry more than my fair share without complaining. My parents loved telling people their daughter was serving her country. They loved the pride by association, the social capital that came with having a child in uniform. But they never loved the inconvenience of it, the missed holidays, the short phone calls from across the world, the long stretches of silence. Melissa stayed close to home. She struggled, according to my parents, struggled with school, struggled with finding direction, struggled with confidence. Every struggle came with a safety net. Tutors appeared. New cars were purchased. Long heart-to-heart talks happened at the kitchen table over cups of tea. I watched from a distance as they poured resources and energy into helping her find herself. I was different. I was fine. I'd always been fine. So they stopped asking, they stopped checking in, and eventually I stopped expecting them to. When my dad had a health scare a few years back, something shifted. I remember the phone call clearly. I was sitting in my car outside the commissary, still in uniform, when my mom's voice came through the speaker, small and scared. She told me about the diagnosis, the surgery, the medical bills that insurance wouldn't fully cover. I didn't hesitate. I told her I'd help. It felt like the right thing to do, the only thing to do. That's what the dependable one does, right? We set up a joint account together, just in case, my dad had said, for emergencies. I started transferring money, a few hundred here, a few hundred there. Then it became a monthly, automatic. I adjusted my budget without thinking too hard about it. I cut back on going out. I delayed repairs on my car. I told myself it was temporary, that once things stabilized, I'd ease off. But months turned into years, and the transfers continued. No one ever said thank you, not directly. When I brought it up once, casually, my mom waved it off. "Oh, honey, you know we appreciate you." And that was it. Appreciation without acknowledgement. Gratitude without accountability. I didn't realize how much resentment I'd been burying until I saw that comment on Facebook. It wasn't just about Paris. It wasn't just about my forgotten birthday. It was about 35 years of being quietly erased while everyone else got to be loud and celebrated and seen. That night, I didn't blow out the candle on my cupcake. I sat there in the dim light of my kitchen, phone in hand, and I made a choice. I opened my banking app and navigated to the joint account. My fingers hovered over the screen for just a moment before I pressed withdraw. That single decision changed everything, whether they were ready for it or not. By the time the money started transferring back into my personal account, 3 days had passed. I checked my balance twice each day, half expecting something to reverse itself, some automatic system to flag the transaction and undo what I'd done. But it didn't. The numbers just sat there, solid and real, and mine. That's when the phone calls started. The first one came from my dad on a Thursday afternoon. I was at work, in the middle of a briefing, when my phone lit up with his name. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call came, and another. Finally, a text appeared. "Call me when you get a chance. There's an issue with the account." An issue. I stared at those 2 words and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not guilt, not yet. Just recognition. They'd noticed, and now they wanted an explanation. I waited until I got home that evening before I responded. By then, my mother had called twice more. When I finally answered, her voice came through tight and clipped. "Hi," she said, not even a hello. "We noticed a large amount of money is missing from the account." "I withdrew it," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "You what?" "I took my money back." "That money was for emergencies," she snapped, her tone sharp now, defensive. I almost laughed. Almost. "Like Paris?" I asked. The silence that followed was longer, heavier. Then I heard shuffling, and my father's voice came on the line. "That's different," he said, as if the distinction were obvious. "How?" I asked. "How is it different?" "Melissa needed a break," he said, his voice taking on that tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, authoritative. "She's been under a lot of stress." Something hardened in my chest, something that had been soft and forgiving for far too long. "I've been sending money for years," I said quietly. "You never once asked if I needed a break." "That's not fair," my mother interjected, her voice rising. "You're stronger. You always have been." And there it was, the sentence that explained everything, the unspoken rule that had governed my entire life. I was strong, so I didn't need support. I was capable, so I didn't deserve care. I was fine, so they didn't have to try. I hung up without another word. Have you ever been told you're too strong to need help? Let me know in the comments. Within hours, the messages started rolling in. Emails, texts from numbers I hadn't saved in years, family group chats that suddenly remembered I existed. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone thought they understood. My Aunt Carol sent a long text about family loyalty. A cousin I barely spoke to suggested I was being dramatic. Another relative sent a passive-aggressive message about forgiveness and grace. Not a single person asked why I'd done it. Not one of them asked if I was okay. They just wanted it undone. They wanted me to apologize, to transfer the money back, to return to being the dependable, invisible one who kept everything running smoothly in the background. That night, I sat on my couch and stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of my refrigerator and the muffled sounds of my neighbors moving around upstairs. I expected to feel sick with regret. I expected guilt to come crashing down, suffocating and overwhelming. But instead, I felt something close to calm, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath after years of shallow, cautious inhales. I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew I wasn't going back. The next morning, I went back to the banking app, not to move anything else, but to look more closely. I needed to see it clearly without the fog of emotion that had clouded my judgment for so long. I sat at that same kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, and scrolled slowly through the transaction history. I didn't rush, I didn't skim. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been happening while I'd been too afraid to look. It was worse than I thought. Paris wasn't a one-time indulgence. There were charges from the year before. Airline tickets, a resort deposit in Florida, designer stores I recognized because Melissa had tagged them in Instagram posts, smiling in dressing room mirrors with shopping bags slung over her arm. There were direct transfers to her personal account, labeled things like "help with rent," and once, insultingly, "for being you." For being you. I sat there, staring at those 3 words, trying to comprehend the audacity. I counted it all, line by line, month by month, year by year. I added it up the way I'd been trained to do everything in my career, methodically, carefully. The final number made my stomach drop. $40,000. $40,000 I'd earned. $40,000 I'd sent in good faith, believing it was going towards medical bills and groceries and keeping the lights on. $40,000 that had funded a lifestyle I was never invited to be part of. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of my refrigerator and the muffled sounds of my neighbors moving around upstairs. My phone buzzed. It was Melissa. "Hey, can you call me? Mom and Dad are freaking out." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm at work. What's going on?" The dots appeared almost immediately. "They said you took money out of the account. Is that true?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. Why would you do that? They need it." That sentence did something to me. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. Melissa had no idea, or maybe she did and it was easier not to think about it. "They used it to send you to Paris," I typed back. Her response came slower this time.
"I didn't ask for that. I didn't know it was your money." I believed her. That was the worst part. Melissa wasn't cruel. She wasn't manipulative. She was just accustomed to being protected from consequences. She lived in a world where things appeared when they needed them and disappeared when they became inconvenient. She never had to ask where the money came from because she never had to worry about money at all. "I know," I wrote back, "but it was." A few minutes passed before my phone rang. I stepped outside onto my narrow balcony, the evening air cool against my skin, and answered. "Hey," Melissa said. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, uncertain. "Hey, they're really upset. I imagine they are. They said you're punishing them." I leaned against the railing and looked down at the empty parking lot below. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said quietly. "I'm taking responsibility for myself." "That money, it helped a lot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "So did my silence," I replied. She didn't have an answer for that. We hung up a few minutes later without resolving anything. I went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and for the first time in days, I slept through the night.
The next morning, my dad called again. This time, I answered. "We need to talk," he said. "No greeting, no preamble, just a demand." "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice even. "That money was part of our safety net," he said, his tone heavy with frustration. "You can't just take it." "I can," I replied, "because it was mine. We had plans for it. You never included me in those plans." He sighed, heavy and dramatic, like I was being unreasonable. "You don't understand how hard things have been." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. "You don't understand how hard it's been for me. We raised you better than this," my mother said sharply in the background. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "You raised me to be responsible," I said. "That's exactly what I'm being." I ended the call before they could regroup and launch another attack. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else, something that felt like power. The backlash escalated after that. My mother sent a long email accusing me of betrayal, of cruelty, of forgetting where I came from. An aunt I barely spoke to texted that family helps family, as if I hadn't been doing exactly that for years. A cousin messaged asking if everything was okay, then, in the same breath, suggested I apologize to keep the peace. Keep the peace. I'd been keeping it my whole life. I'd kept it so well that I disappeared entirely. When was the last time someone asked you to keep the peace at your own expense? I'd love to hear your story. At work, I threw myself into routine. Training sessions, evaluations, paperwork. The structure grounded me. My unit didn't care about my family drama. They cared that I showed up, that I did my job, that I had their backs. In that environment, I was valued for what I did, not for what I quietly provided while being ignored. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called the one person I trusted to be honest with me, my former supervisor, now a close friend. "You did the right thing," she said, after I explained everything, my voice cracking more than once as the words spilled out. "It doesn't feel like it," I admitted. "Setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish," she said firmly. "It makes you sane. It feels like I'm tearing my family apart." "No," she said, her voice softening. "They did that. You're just refusing to hold the pieces together anymore." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket. That night, I logged into my bank account again, not to withdraw anything else, just to look. The number was still there, real, solid. A reminder that I'd finally taken control of something I'd been giving away piece by piece for years. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I'd done. I was afraid of how long it had taken me to do it. The silence from my family didn't last. 2 weeks after I withdrew the money, the tone of the messages changed. The panic sharpened, the patience evaporated. It was no longer confusion or disappointment, it was accusation, the kind that assumes guilt and demands immediate surrender. It started with an email from my mother, the subject line in all caps. "We need to talk."
I opened it during my lunch break, sitting in my car with the engine off, the afternoon sun beating against the windshield. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't mention my birthday, even in passing. She didn't pretend this was about repairing our relationship. Instead, she wrote about stress, about bills, about how my father hadn't been sleeping, about how Melissa was emotionally fragile after learning about the money. She said I'd blindsided them. She said I'd embarrassed the family. She said I needed to fix this quickly. The word apology appeared 3 times in the email. The word money appeared 7. I closed the email and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. My hands were shaking again, not from fear, from that familiar pull to make things right at my own expense. That instinct didn't disappear overnight. It had been hardwired into me for decades. That evening, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the area code told me everything I needed to know. "Hello?" I answered. "This is Aunt Carol. Your mother is beside herself." I leaned back on my couch and stared at the ceiling, already exhausted. "I'm sorry to hear that. She's been crying for days, as if I personally reached through the phone and hurt my mother myself. Your father, too. You've put them in an impossible position. By taking back my own money? You know it's not that simple," she said, taking on a lecturing tone. "Family doesn't keep score." I almost laughed. "Family shouldn't keep receipts either," I said quietly, but here we are. The call ended awkwardly, like all the others. No resolution, just pressure, just another person trying to guilt me back into place. The next escalation came publicly. I woke up one morning to a flood of notifications on my phone. My mother had posted on Facebook. She didn't name me directly at first, but she didn't have to. Sometimes the people you sacrifice the most for are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Family values don't mean what they used to. Praying for wisdom and strength. The comments poured in immediately. Sympathy, validation, thinly veiled judgments aimed at whoever had caused this unnamed pain. A few people tagged me outright. Others messaged privately, asking what happened, urging me to be the bigger person. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, and felt something inside me go very still. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. This was about control, about rewriting the narrative so they could stay blameless while I carried all the shame. The battle lines have been drawn, and I'm about to do something I never thought I'd have the courage to do.
At work that day, I couldn't focus. I went through the motions, but my mind kept replaying the post, the comments, the implications that I was cold, selfish, ungrateful. I'd worn those labels quietly my whole life. Seeing them thrown around publicly felt like a line being crossed, and I didn't know if I could uncross it. That evening, I met a couple of people from my unit for dinner. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries at a place near base. They didn't know the details, but they could tell something was off. "You look like you're carrying a rucksack you forgot to put down," one of them said lightly, trying to make me smile. I managed a weak grin. "Something like that." After dinner, one of them pulled me aside, her expression serious. "Whatever it is," she said, "remember this. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they're related." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deep in my chest. When I got home, I saw that my mother's post had been edited. This time, my name was included. "Ashley, if you're reading this, know that your father and I are heartbroken by your choices. We raised you better. Family is supposed to support each other." My hands trembled as I read it, not from shame, but from a slow-burning anger I'd never allowed myself to feel before. They had made it public. They had painted themselves as victims, and they expected me to stay silent, like I always had. I opened the comment box and stared at it for a long time. I thought about ignoring it, about taking the high road, about letting it blow over. Then I thought about my birthday cupcake, about Paris, about $40,000, about a lifetime of being told I was fine. I started typing. "Mom, I gave you and Dad over $40,000 across several years to help with medical bills and essentials. You used that money for luxury trips, shopping, and gifts for Melissa. You forgot my 35th birthday and publicly stated that my sister was the only child who made you proud. I took back my money because I was being used, not supported. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with honesty and accountability, not guilt." I read it twice, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then I hit post. The reaction was immediate. Some relatives went quiet. Others pushed back, calling me disrespectful, accusing me of airing dirty laundry. But a few voices cut through the noise. An uncle commented that he'd always wondered how my parents afforded so many extras on their income. A cousin said I was brave for speaking up. Someone else wrote, "Finally, the truth." I logged out and turned my phone face down on the table. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind replayed every possible outcome, every worst-case scenario. But underneath the anxiety, there was something new. Relief. I had told the truth, out loud, in my own words, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for it. Have you ever had to choose your peace and your family's approval? Tell me about it in the comments. For a few days after the post, I lived in a strange, suspended quiet. The notifications slowed, then stopped. It was as if the family collectively held its breath, waiting to see if I would backtrack, delete my comment, soften the edges, make it all easier to digest. I didn't. I went to work, I cooked dinner, I folded laundry. I let the silence sit exactly where it was. That's when I realized something important. Nothing bad was happening to me. No one showed up at my door. No one cut me off from something essential. The world didn't collapse because I'd told the truth. The fear I'd carried for so long, the fear of rocking the boat, had been built on the assumption that the boat was mine to lose. It wasn't. It never had been. With the money back in my account, I made myself slow down. I didn't splurge. I didn't make any dramatic purchases to prove a point. Instead, I opened a notebook and wrote down things I'd put off for years because I'd convinced myself they were indulgent or irresponsible. A real emergency fund, a certification course I'd wanted to take but never had the time or money for, physical therapy for an old training injury I'd been ignoring for too long, small things, sensible things, things that were suddenly, beautifully possible. I enrolled in a professional certification program related to logistics and operations, something that could translate well when my military career eventually ended. The first night of class, I sat at a desk in civilian clothes, notebook open, listening to the instructor explain the syllabus. I felt nervous in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not scared, hopeful. At work, something shifted too. I didn't realize how much emotional weight I'd been carrying until it was gone. I spoke up more in meetings. I volunteered for a leadership role I would have quietly avoided, convincing myself I wasn't ready or didn't deserve it. When my supervisor pulled me aside one afternoon to tell me my performance had been noticed, I felt a flicker of pride I didn't immediately try to dismiss or deflect. "Whatever you're doing," he said with a knowing smile, "keep doing it." I thanked him without downplaying the compliment. It felt strange. It felt good. My chosen family, the friends I'd built over years of moves and deployments, noticed the change too. One evening, a few of us gathered at a friend's apartment. Nothing formal. Takeout containers spread across the counter, music playing low in the background. "You seem lighter," someone said, handing me a drink. "I feel lighter," I admitted, and I meant it. They didn't press for details. They didn't need the full story. They just clinked their cups against mine and smiled. And that simple, wordless support meant more than any forced apology ever could have. Melissa texted me a few times during that stretch. Her messages were cautious, uncertain. "I didn't know things were that bad. I'm sorry. Can we talk sometime?" I didn't respond right away. Not because I was punishing her, but because I needed space to figure out what I actually felt. I knew she hadn't orchestrated everything. I also knew she had benefited from it without question. Both things could be true. Meanwhile, my parents stayed quiet. No calls, no emails, no new posts. I suspected they were regrouping, deciding on their next move.
It came a week later in the form of a voicemail from my dad. "Your mother and I would like to talk in person," he said, his voice measured, controlled. "This can't be resolved over social media. We're family. We should handle this like adults." I listened to it twice before deleting it. Later that night, I replayed his words in my head. Handle this like adults. The phrase landed differently than it once would have. Adults don't forget birthdays. Adults don't take money under false pretenses. Adults don't manipulate public opinion to avoid accountability. I texted Melissa back that night. If we talk, it has to be honest, and it has to be separate from mom and dad. She responded almost immediately. "I understand. Everything is about to come to a head. Stay with me. You won't believe what happens next."
We met for coffee a few days later, just Melissa and me. She looked different, quieter, less polished. She fiddled with her cup while she talked, eyes downcast, fingers tracing the rim nervously. "I didn't know they were using your money like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have asked." "Yes," I said gently, but firmly. "You should have." She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. "I'm trying to figure out who I am without them fixing everything for me." I believed her, or maybe I believed she wanted to try. Either way, that was enough for now. As for my parents, I didn't rush to meet them. I wasn't avoiding the conversation, I was preparing for it. I wrote down what I wanted to say, not accusations, but boundaries. Clear lines that didn't waver depending on guilt or pressure. I didn't know how it would end. I just knew one thing for certain. This time, I wasn't going to disappear to make them comfortable. The restaurant was quiet in that way upscale places always are on a weeknight. Low lighting, soft music, the gentle clink of glasses instead of loud conversation. I chose it deliberately. Public enough to keep tempers in check, neutral enough that no one could claim home field advantage. I arrived early and asked for a table in the back. When I sat down, I placed my phone screen down on the table and took a slow, steadying breath. I wasn't here to fight. I wasn't here to win. I was here to tell the truth and see what happened when I didn't soften it for their comfort. Melissa arrived first. She looked nervous, scanning the room before she spotted me. We hugged, brief and careful, and sat side by side. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We were both waiting for the same thing. My parents walked in exactly on time. My mother's posture was rigid, her purse clutched tight against her side like armor. My father looked thinner than I remembered, his jaw set in that familiar way he used when he wanted to project authority without raising his voice. We exchanged polite hellos and ordered water. The silence stretched uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I didn't agree to be lectured. I agreed to talk. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "We want to fix this." I nodded. "Then let's be honest." My father folded his hands on the table. "What you did hurt us." "What you did hurt me," I replied. "For years." My mother sighed sharply, like I was being dramatic. "We've already said we made mistakes." "Have you?" I asked, meeting her eyes. "Because mistakes don't explain Paris." Melissa shifted beside me, her presence a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone in this. My father leaned back in his chair. "That trip wasn't about you." "That's the problem," I said, my voice steady and even. "Nothing ever was." My mother's eyes flashed with something between anger and disbelief. "We worried about Melissa more. She needed us." "And I didn't?" I let the question hang in the air, heavy and unavoidable. "Or did you just decide I'd be fine without you? Because I always was." Silence, thick and suffocating. I took a breath and asked the question I'd been carrying for weeks. "Tell me one thing you're proud of me for. One specific thing." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at my father. He started to speak, then stopped, his expression shifting from defensive to uncertain. The waiter returned with our water, set the glasses down quietly, and left. My parents still hadn't answered. "That's not fair," my mother's voice cracked. "It's accurate.
You took my money, over $40,000, and used it for things you never told me about. You forgot my birthday. You told the world my sister was the only one who made you proud. And now you want me to apologize for setting a boundary. My father's shoulders sagged, the authority draining from his posture. We're under a lot of stress. So was I said, my voice firm but not cruel. I just didn't make it your problem. My mother leaned forward, desperation creeping into her tone. Do you want us to beg? I want you to understand, and I want you to stop. Stop what? She snapped, her patience finally breaking. Stop using guilt, stop rewriting history, stop asking me to fix the consequences of your choices. Melissa spoke then, her voice soft but steady. They're right, she said, turning to our parents. I went through the statements. I saw everything. My mother turned to her, stunned. Melissa? No, Melissa said, shaking her head. I've had enough of this too. My father rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking much older. We were counting on that money. We might lose the house. I met his eyes without flinching. You won't. You have options. Downsizing, jobs, help from Melissa if she chooses, but not from me. Not anymore. My mother's eyes filled with tears. So you're abandoning us? I shook my head slowly. I'm stepping back. There's a difference.
My father exhaled, long and slow. What do you want from us? I want accountability, I said, and I want boundaries respected. No more public posts about me, no more asking for money. If we have a relationship, it's based on honesty, not obligation. My mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I can't do this. My father hesitated, then stood too, his expression conflicted. We'll think about what you said. I hope you do, I replied, and I meant it. They left without another word. Melissa and I sat there for a moment, the table suddenly feeling too big and too quiet. She reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry it took me this long. Me too, I said, and I meant both parts. Sorry it took so long, but glad we were finally here. We ordered dinner and talked about ordinary things, classes she was considering, work projects I was excited about. It felt strange and good to talk without all that tension pressing down on us. When we finally stood to leave, I felt tired but steady. I'd said what I needed to say. Whatever happened next wasn't on me to fix. Outside, the air was cool and crisp. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. The weeks after the dinner passed more quietly than I expected. There were no dramatic follow-up calls, no surprise visits, no public posts tagging me in guilt-soaked prayers. My parents retreated into themselves, stunned by the fact that their usual tools hadn't worked this time. And for the first time in my life, that retreat didn't pull me back in. Melissa and I started meeting once a week, nothing formal. Coffee, walks around the park, sometimes just sitting in my living room while the TV played in the background. She told me she was looking for her own apartment, that she'd signed up for night classes, that she was tired of being taken care of in a way that kept her small and dependent. I listened without trying to fix anything. That wasn't my job anymore. At work, things continued to improve. The certification course was challenging, but I loved it. I stayed up late studying, not because I had to prove anything to anyone, but because it felt good to invest in myself without guilt weighing down every decision. My supervisor noticed. A few months later, he pulled me aside and told me I was being considered for a leadership track assignment, something I'd wanted for years but never thought I'd actually get. I walked back to my desk with a smile I didn't try to hide. One evening, as I was making dinner, my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I stood there for a long moment, wooden spoon in hand, steam rising from the pot on the stove, deciding whether to answer. Then I did. "Hi," he said. His voice sounded different, quieter, softer. "Hi. I wanted to let you know," he began, hesitating slightly. "I got a new job. It doesn't pay what the old one did, but it's something. Your mom picked up part-time work, too. That's good, I said, and I meant it. There was a pause, a long one. Then he said something I never thought I'd hear. I'm sorry. The word landed heavier than anything else he could have said. I'm sorry for how we treated you, for taking you for granted, for the money, for all of it. I closed my eyes. Tears came, sudden and sharp, rolling down my cheeks before I could stop them. I'm not calling to ask for anything, he added quickly. I just needed you to know I see it now. I see what we did, and I'm sorry. We talked for a while after that, about work, about the weather, about nothing and everything. When we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, letting the moment settle deep inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was acknowledgement, and that mattered. My mother didn't call. Instead, weeks later, she sent a short email. No subject line, no excuses, just a few sentences saying she was trying to do better and didn't expect anything from me in return. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest in a way she'd never been before. Life moved forward. I finished my course with honors. I stepped into a new role at work. I started saving for a place of my own, something with a little more space, a little more light. On my 36th birthday, my apartment was full. Friends from work, people from my unit, Melissa sitting on the couch laughing at something stupid on TV. There was a cake. Someone had remembered candles. When they sang, I actually cried, but this time from joy, not loneliness. As I looked around that night, surrounded by people who actually saw me, I realized something that surprised me. Withdrawing that money hadn't been revenge, it had been self-preservation. I hadn't done it to hurt my family. I'd done it because I finally understood that love without respect isn't love. It's obligation, and obligation had been draining me dry for too long. If you're listening to this story and something inside you feels uncomfortably familiar, if you've been the reliable one, the strong one, the invisible one, I want you to know this. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. Choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. And walking away from being used doesn't mean you don't love your family. It means you love yourself enough to stop disappearing. If this story resonated with you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about strength, boundaries, and quiet victories, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let's keep this conversation going together, because you deserve to be seen, you deserve to take up space, and you deserve to stop being invisible.